On the day after the Detroit Grand Prix, the Space Shuttle Discovery touched down at Edwards Air Force Base. On board, as well as 5 US astronauts, were one Frenchman, Patrick Baudry, and Prince Sultan Salman Al Saud, who had achieved a triple first, being the first Arab, the first Muslim, and the first member of royalty in space. A few days later, a scandal broke in Austria when diethylene glycol was discovered in wines from several wineries. The Austrian wine industry at the time relied heavily on exports to West Germany, competing with similar sweet and semi-sweet German wines, but undercutting them on price. A couple of indifferent grape harvests in the early 80s meant that by 1984, there just wasn't enough sweet wine to fulfill contracts. To meet their obligations, some of the wineries added chemicals, including diethylene glycol, which is often used as an ingredient in antifreeze, to the wine, which was then detected in quality checks. 27 million litres of wine were destroyed, exports collapsed, and it wasn't until 2001 that Austrian wine export figures reached their pre-1985 level, but now with much stricter quality control. On Sunday the 30th, the final hostages were released from TWA Flight 847 in Beirut following a personal intervention from Ronald Reagan. They were driven first to Syria and then flown back to West Germany by USAF cargo plane. A 1986 movie, The Delta Force, was partially based on the incident, though rather than a peaceful solution, the movie saw Chuck Norris and co. storming the plane and rescuing the hostages. On the same day, Route 66 officially ceased to exist. The entirety of its route having been superseded bit by bit, the official designation of United States Route 66 was removed from the register. Some sections of the old road remained in local roads, private driveways, or part of industrial or commercial estates. Others were abandoned entirely, though a few short sections survived as state roads, sometimes with the number 66 somewhere in their designation. In the following years, a number of Route 66 associations sprang up dedicated to preserving the history of the route, and while it's no longer possible to drive the original road in its full length, some sections have been preserved or restored and make up the historic Route 66 tourist trail. And British 13-year-old Ruth Lawrence graduated from Oxford with a starred first and special commendation in mathematics, having completed the degree in 2 years instead of the normal 3. She was the youngest British person ever to gain a first-class degree, to which she added a physics degree in 1986, a D.Phil in mathematics in 1989, and at the age of 19 took up an academic post as a junior fellow at Harvard. She married a fellow mathematician in 1998 and currently teaches at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. And the F1 circus arrived back in Europe and headed to the long dusty straights of Paul Ricard. As promised, the new Tyrrell Renault would be making its debut on Renault's home track, though after some consideration it had been decided to assign both available new chassis to Brundle and have Beloff continue with the old Ford-powered car. It was the first experience of turbo power for team and both drivers, and there was a sharp learning curve, different power-to-weight ratios, turbo lag, and many other issues to contend with that much of the rest of the paddock had figured out years ago. After spending so long opposing them, as Ken Tyrrell ruefully remarked, the rest of the teams were not exactly falling over themselves to give them tips. In previous years, the Renault factory team had come good on their home tarmac even in years when they hadn't been doing well elsewhere, and they would be hoping that this year would be no exception, especially given the way that they had been comprehensively outperformed by their own customers Lotus so far. Hoping to stave off the inevitable rumours of head office pulling the plug, the team had a revised RE60B chassis for Tombe, which looked fairly similar from the outside but had upgraded suspension, brakes, engine mountings, gearbox casing, wing mountings and side pods. Ferrari had new cars too, with revised front suspension geometry, but found quickly that what had worked on the test track at Fiorano didn't work as well at Paul Ricard for some reason, and there was an air of increasing frustration in the Ferrari pit as the practice and qualifying sessions got underway. With Zach Speed back in the paddock, there was a full grid, and with a following wind down the Mistral Straight, the cars were clocking well over 200 miles an hour, and some drivers even claimed 220. Senna once again set the early pace, and had provisional pole on Friday, while Nigel Mansell had a nasty crash on Saturday morning when his left rear tyre blew out at 200 miles an hour at the end of Mistral, and in the ensuing departure from the track, one of his front wheels became detached and hit him on the head. He was taken off to hospital with severe concussion and would take no further part in the weekend, though he was sufficiently recovered to fly home on Sunday. Buoyed by his success in Detroit, Keke Rosberg put in a typical gung-ho qualifying lap, leaving observers to speculate on whether he had actually taken the infamous Sanya kink without lifting and snatched pole late on Saturday by 0.4 seconds. Alboreto had managed to squeeze third out of the Ferrari and would start alongside Prost. Piquet was fifth, Lauda sixth, then De Angelis in the other Lotus. Berger was next, then an out-of-sorts Tombe who was enjoying the car but suffering from a dicky tummy, and Warwick alongside in 10th. Sura in the second Brabham was 13th, Johansson in the second Ferrari 14th, the new turbo Tyrrell 20th just ahead of Palmer, and Beloff a disgruntled 25th and last, some 12 seconds off the pace. Race day was sunny and hot as the cars lined up for the start. Rosberg and Senna launched off the line, but Prost was sluggish away, and Piquet slotted in third behind the leaders, followed by Alboreto and De Angelis, then Lauda, Berger and Prost. By the end of the Mistral straight, Rosberg was already pulling away, while Piquet was hanging on Senna's gearbox. The powerful Brabham BMW combination had suffered so far this year, not least from Pirelli's tyres not being up to the standards of Goodyear's, but they had introduced a new front tyre here and it seemed to be working at the moment. The Pirelli shod Ligiers were also looking halfway decent for a change, further back in midfield, at least until Lafitte blew his turbo on lap 3, and De Cesaris's driveshaft broke 2 laps later. Senna turned up the gas a little and Rosberg wasn't able to stretch his lead, and the top 3 began to pull away from Alboreto, who blew his turbo on lap 6 trying to keep up, dumping oil on the senior kink in the process. Prost, meanwhile, had disposed of Berger and the 2 McLarens were now running together, right behind the new third-place man Elio De Angelis. So now there were 2 groups of 3 cars at the front, with Piquet harrying Senna, allowing Rosberg to pull away again. The Brabham made it past the Lotus on lap 7, by which point Rosberg was some 3 seconds ahead, and Nelson set about trying to catch him. The Finn was on the softer B compound Goodyears that had served him well in Detroit and was expected to need to stop, while Gordon Murray had said before the race that he hoped the new Pirellis would go the distance, but they hadn't actually done a full race yet. In any case, Piquet was soon right up with Rosberg, while behind the leading pair Senna had pulled into the pits with an attack of Lotus gearbox, promoting Lauda to third, having also got past De Angelis, who then also lost fourth to Prost. Rosberg was already struggling for grip and Piquet fairly sailed past at Beaucassé on lap 11. Piquet settled into the lead, like the previous 6 races of frustration had never happened, while over the next 10 laps the 2 McLarens slowly caught Rosberg. By the time they caught him, Piquet was 16 seconds up the road. Rosberg, on fading tyres, was in trouble in the corners but just too fast on the straights, and Lauda spent lap after lap staring at the back of the Williams before expiring with gearbox trouble on lap 31, releasing Prost to have a go. Senna, meanwhile, had rejoined the race, only to have an engine failure instead, drop oil on his own tyres and spin into retirement. So it was Piquet leading Rosberg and Prost, with De Angelis still plugging away in 4th, Sura up to 5th in the other Brabham, and Tombe 6th in the new Renault, who was being caught by Johansson. Prost was clearly being held up by Rosberg, but just couldn't find a way through as the race entered its second half. Finally, on lap 38 of 53, he made it through at the Verrières bends, by which time Piquet's lead was over 20 seconds. Prost took 3 seconds out of that in his first lap clear of Rosberg, while 2 laps later the Finn came in for new tyres, a slick stop meaning he only lost 1 place to De Angelis. With 12 laps left to go, Keke put his foot down, while, unseen to the TV viewers, Johansson had got ahead of Tombe and was now bearing down on Sura in 5th, which he took when Mark made a precautionary tyre stop. Prost was still catching Piquet, but not quickly enough to take the lead in the remaining time, especially when Piquet sped up a bit and stabilised the gap at 11 seconds. Meanwhile, Rosberg had set a new lap record, and retaken third from De Angelis as he continued to charge, but with a 20-second gap to Prost it looked like he had too much to do in the remaining laps. Nobody told Keke that though, and as Prost eased off and settled for second, Rosberg, entirely ignored by the cameras as they watched Piquet cruise home, hauled in Prost and nipped past on the very last lap to take second. So Nelson Piquet took his 13th race win on his 101st race, with Rosberg moving up to 4th in the title race. Prost's third and De Angelis, who lost 4th to Johansson on the very last lap, meant that Alain and Elio were now equal second in the championship, while Tombe christened his new Renault with the last point. The Renault team's usual home race boost just hadn't been there on this occasion, which of course started up all the rumours about the plug being pulled again. It was also the first win for Pirelli tyres since Stirling Moss for Van Wall and Juan Manuel Fangio for Maserati won every race of the 1957 season on the Italian rubber.